Hello, everyone. Welcome to Brownish Parenting on Ruckus Avenue Radio, available on the free iHeartRadio app. I'm Dr. Amita, your host. I'm a parent of two. I'm a second generation Indian American who was born and raised in California. So I'm definitely a California girl. I'm the founder of Social Edge, which is a company that's really dedicated to meeting the academic, social, emotional, and cultural needs of children. And I'm an award-winning children's book author. I write children's books about the Indian culture. I create workbooks on emotional intelligence. And I've also been a professor at San Jose State University in the Department of Child and Adolescence for over a decade. I am so excited to bring this show to you because it's going to unveil modern Desi topics. And they're going to be about parenting, and we're going to explore some of the latest research in parenting so that you can decide what works best for your family. So today we're going to kick off this show by telling you my personal story. The topics that we're going to be addressing in Brownish Parenting are all topics that I wish I grew up with. I wish that a parent had really talked to me about these topics. So there are also topics that are going to be well supported in the research in terms of what children are going through today in contemporary times and how we can really help meet those social and emotional needs of our children. The way these topics are implemented, again, in each family is going to look different based on varying South Asian cultural and religious values. So we know that South Asia is very diverse. And so when we think about South Asia, there are really 7 countries that we're looking at. We're looking at India, which makes up, a large majority of that region. We're looking at Pakistan, we're looking at Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Bhutan. So when I talk about South Asian culture, I want you to remember that it's more than just one country. And each family is really going to be able to prioritize, again, the values and beliefs that they identify with based on their religion, right? And their culture. So given these differences, I want to note the similarities in all these topics. So when we talk about brownish parenting, we want to think about the parenting styles and behaviors that work well for our bicultural children. And we want to think about what types of relationships we want to have with our children once they move out and become adults. Having the time to think about these topics is something that I am very grateful for because we do have that flexibility in our schedules. We're not struggling to make ends meet. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that this is really important because financial status does play a role, right? So our work, the financial pressures that we have, they are going to play a role in whether we are able to reduce our parenting stress, but they can also increase our parenting stress. And so this in turn is going to translate to the behavior that we show up at home with in terms of our parent-child relationships. What types of resources do we have available to get help if we need help? Have someone come in to help us, the mental capacity that we have to handle some of the stressors that come in when we come home, because so much of it is unexpected, that flexibility. So we want to think about some of that as we dive into these topics. We are definitely in a better position to think about these topics than older generations who were financially struggling to establish themselves in a new country. Disposal. When we think about the older generation, we want to acknowledge that they didn't have the knowledge and the resources. And we're a new generation. And so we want to do things a little bit differently and with that understanding and that reflection. So I am super excited to bring on therapists, psychologists, experts, coaches, and influencers that are going to give us their perspective in the work that they're doing with South Asian American parents, their children, and their families today. Brownish parenting is for South Asian parents who are changing with the times. We are doing things differently than previous generations, and our bicultural children are learning how to navigate in between the hyphens of 2 cultures that are South Asian and American, and we're creating new ways of being in the world by living in between the hyphen. And what does that mean is something we're going to be looking at throughout Brownish parenting. In order to be effective guides for our children, we need to know how they are experiencing the world that they live in and how they're making sense of it all. So we do have to have conversations with them about what's happening at school. We do have to be open to acknowledge, what's happening. So this podcast is for parents who want to have those positive, respectful, and close relationships with their children. They want to know if their child is struggling socially and emotionally. Are they getting bullied? Are they going through a breakup? Are they experiencing anxiety or depression? Are you noticing certain signs in your child that are different from, when they were younger? And what does that mean? We want to support children through these types of sensitive topics that may come up. It's important to note here that brownish parenting is not permissive parenting. I'm not telling you to let your children do whatever they want, right? So I'm telling you that you are still the authority. You are setting the rules. You're discussing the rules. You are following through with consequences, but it's about building that positive relationship with your child. They're not always going to agree with everything that you decide for them. And that's okay. That's part of parenting, right? They need that structure. They need those limits in order to practice self-control. They need opportunities to practice self-control. They're not just born with it. We need to provide them with that structure and with those guidelines. And so they can then say, hey, things didn't go my way, but I need to regulate my emotions when things are not going my way. And parents should really be there to help sort of support and scaffold them to do that. So part of brownish parenting is, how do we help them regulate those hard, difficult, uncomfortable emotions that they feel when they do need to regulate? So I was born and raised in California. Majority of my life, I spent in Concord and Walnut Creek, and it was a primarily Caucasian setting. So when I saw my Caucasian friends' families eating together, I saw them having these fun conversations, and they were laughing with each other and debating, and they were a lot more verbal than me. They had a lot more conversations. And I wondered why, when I went back to my home, my parents were really like serious. They were stressed. They didn't want to hear about anything. As I got older, I realized that my immigrant families have a tremendous amount of stress in their lives. Things are just kind of piling up. They moved to a brand new country. They're trying to finish their education and their master's. They're trying to get a job. They're trying to buy a house. They're trying to pay the bills. They're assimilating to a new culture. And they're trying to keep in touch with everyone back home. So they're like navigating multiple spaces, right, in their lives, figuring out where to settle down. So in the midst of all of this, they are also becoming parents, which is a major life stressor, and we know this. So parenting in general is highly stressful. And I can't even imagine having to do it while also learning how to survive in a whole new country, in a whole new world. And so in addition to that, my parents were not brought up with parents who really communicated with them. They weren't asking them how they were feeling after school and what was going on with their friends. So they didn't have models that really socialized them into what these open and honest conversations look like and feel like. So today, parents are also navigating various life stressors, right? We have full-time jobs, travel requirements. There's parents that are parenting children with special needs, like autism or ADHD, which is very common. They're trying to take care of their own elderly parents as their parents become more dependent on them and they need more caretaking. And the list just goes on. So this just leads us to not having a lot of physical or emotional energy for our own children. We're just drained at the end of the day and we're trying to get through it. And we are trying to do our best. So we're going to try to figure out those pockets of time that we can have with our children that provides them with some quality interactions, right? And so for those listening to the podcast, I want you to know that I'm there with you. I am your ally. It's never going to be perfect. We're going to make lots of mistakes, but we are going to try to do our best, right? So the research shows that the more knowledge we have, the more resources we have, we connect with others through this brownish parenting community, share strategies about what's working, what you did when you had that bad day, but you didn't bring it home to your children. These are all things we want to talk about and become more confident in our role as parents. And part of that is self-care. So the research also shows us that we need to take care of ourselves because we've been brought up in a way where we feel like to be a good parent, we have to continuously self-sacrifice. And it's just not sustainable. And it doesn't lead us to be present for our own children. We're not happy. And our our kids know that. So brownish parenting is going to address the ways in which we can prioritize ourselves. How can you be more prepared and ready for all of these unexpected things that are coming your way? And so we need to put our own oxygen mask on before we can help our kids. And so I want to start by saying thank you for setting aside your valuable time to listen to this podcast. And I want to offer you some time to reflect and think back to the ways we were parented, because that plays such an important role in how we are parenting today. And so Brownish Parenting is going to have a segment as part of every episode that we have, which is called Parenting from the Inside Out. So what does that mean? That means that to parent our children today, we really need to address our own upbringing. And that's going to mean unlearning things that were taught to us that we've kept in subconsciously. And it's going to address how our own thoughts and beliefs really influence the way in which we parent our kids today. So parents are going to get a chance to reflect back with these experts on the South Asian American culture. Like what was typically done in our culture, right? When it came to discipline, what was typically done in our culture when it came to communication or sharing our emotions. And so these types of messages that we received while growing up are playing a role, right? And so we're looking at topics like gender socialization. How were we socialized as males and females in our culture? We're looking at how our communities make sense of gender identities and sexual orientations. We're looking at the LGBTQIA plus community. And we want to think about divorce in our relationships and how we can communicate a divorce to our children. Why is divorce so taboo? Since I was born and raised in California, I had a very different upbringing than my own parents who grew up in India. So I'm going to share how my bicultural life experiences have helped me shape who I've become today. My interests, we will also get a preview of some topics that we will be covering in the podcast. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will talk more about my personal experiences being one of the few Indians at my school in Walnut Creek and how I navigated xenophobia and bullying during the elementary school years. Welcome back. We just talked a little bit about what to expect from the Brownish Parenting podcast and why it's important for us to create this community. Now we're going to go ahead and look at my elementary school years. And so my first day in school, I remember. So on my first day of school, when I started kindergarten, I vividly remember this memory because I remember just feeling really scared. The feeling was anxious. I didn't know anyone in my classroom, and I didn't really hang out with a lot of kids my age. I was really shy. I spent a lot of time with my mom. And so I remember going in, and the first thing the teacher does is take roll. And my name in Bengali is Amita. And so that was the name that I associated with. So when she starts taking roll and she calls out Amita, I don't raise my hand because that was not my name. And so I just stayed quiet. There was a lot of confusion in the classroom. Everyone's looking at one another and they're like, well, who did we not call? She's like, there's somebody here, and they didn't raise their hand. And, I'm starting to kind of have this uncomfortable feeling because I'm like, maybe that was me, but I'm not sure. Should I say something? Maybe this will blow over. And then all of a sudden, obviously, the teacher figures it out, and she's standing right in front of me, and she's pointing at me, and she's like, you are Amita. And then all the kids just start laughing because who wouldn't know their own name? And so I definitely disassociated from my identity at school from the very first day because I was still very connected to being Amita, and that was who I was at home. And it was part of, again, the fact that I spent a lot of time with my mom. I did whatever my parents wanted me to do. And so I wasn't really present because I always felt this discomfort in feeling like I needed to be someone else. And so I wasn't really present because I always felt this discomfort in feeling like I needed to be someone else. And really, the person I was Amita. From that point on, I was sort of the strange Indian kid, right? If I had a neighborhood friend over, they would go back to school and say my house smelled of curry. They made fun of my clothes because my mom picked them. And that's what Amita would do. She would let her mom pick her clothes and tell her what to look like, what to dress like. I also talked with a lisp, so I was really socially awkward. And to be honest, I didn't, again, have a lot of opportunities to socialize where, peers would tell me that that was an awkward thing that I said or did. And there's a little bit of peer pressure when you're like, well, why are you acting that way? Why do you keep singing? Like, that's annoying. And then the kid learns, okay, like, let's not do that. I was probably the kid that was singing. I was the kid that when someone told me my drawing was really good, I would be like, "Oh, I know. My mom teaches me how to draw and I know I'm an artist." And it was because my parents would tell me that at home and then they would look at each other and be like, "Wow, I was just trying to be nice. It wasn't really that good." And so, again, I realized today that I did lack that socialization with peers my age, and that led me to being victimized. And so I'm a strong advocate for parents socializing their children and being partners with their children in the socialization process, like scheduling play dates for them when they're young, helping them build those pro-social skills. Because when you play a board game at home with your preschooler, parents typically let their preschoolers win. But when they go into a preschool setting, they start to learn that how to share, right? To use a timer when they want a toy or to ask, can I have a turn with that? So these are all things that children can learn from an early age in the right types of environments. For me, the elementary school years were a blur because I had disassociated from who I was and just kind of always had this uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. However, there were periods that I do fondly remember, and they were kind of like these light bulb moments for me. And it felt like I was truly seen by others for who I was. And so one memory I have is when my mom, who came in as Mrs. Roy, which I'd never heard before, her being called that, and so the teacher announces that, my mom, Mrs. Roy, was coming into my fifth grade class to show everyone how to tie a sari. And at first I was terrified because I thought this was going to be another thing that my peers were going to make fun of me about. But to my surprise, all of the kids wanted to be picked when she came in and wanted to have that sari tied on her. And it was really this feel good oxytocin high that I received because this was my mom, Mrs. Roy. So she was like sort of assimilated and coming into my classroom. And so it was my first vision of that there can be someone Indian in a classroom setting and teaching us about topics. And so these were the types of experiences that really led me to writing books about the Indian culture and becoming an advocate for other South Asian parents to go into classroom settings to teach all children about our culture, right? So parents are like these living, breathing models of what it means to be South Asian American living in the US, going into a US classroom and teaching children about our culture. Because parents can address those misconceptions, they can teach in culturally relevant ways. And this was something that came up in my own dissertation, which was really helping children see people like them. And it helps not only validate their bicultural identity, but also helps them consider other career possibilities. Because many of my research participants felt like they couldn't be teachers because they'd never seen teachers of color in their classroom setting. They thought if they wanted to work with kids, they had to be a pediatrician. And so this really does open up a lot of doors when you think about a parent going into a classroom setting to teach children about our culture and making it fun and having it be a positive memory. So in this way, it helps all children learn about South Asian cultures from someone that can really provide that insider's perspective. They can address those stereotypes and misconceptions. Now let's go into what was happening at home during the elementary school years. So stress levels were definitely high. My parents were trying to buy a house. They wanted to be in a good school district. So we were right on that border of Concord so that I could go to school in Walnut Creek. And so I didn't feel like I could tell my parents what was going on with me at school. My dad was really authoritarian and strict. He just wanted us to do what we were told and to not add more stress, right? So that whole idea of children should be seen and not heard. And this was also how he was raised by his own dad. And that authoritarian style of parenting typically leads children to obey their parents out of fear. And so it really doesn't help them understand why those rules exist or why they need to obey the rules. Whereas my mom, she was more permissive and easygoing. So if we had problems, she typically didn't really know what to say about them, but would tell us to go and pray to God. And so permissive style parenting typically leads children to guide themselves to do whatever they want. And when she told me to pray, I wasn't really sure what to do. So I would go into our little puja room, which was like a closet in our hallway upstairs. And so if I was getting bullied, I would just kind of sit there and think about ways I could kind of pray away those problems, like maybe some external force is going to come in and have that bully be sick the next day. So it just leads children to have a higher external locus of control, which means that they believe that things are not really in their control and that whatever's happening in your life is based on external events. And so maybe if you're good things will happen because God is looking after you. And we definitely want our children to start building that internal locus of control so that they believe that, what they do and what they say translates in the real. What's interesting about this strategy that I used was that I continued to do this up until I went to college. And so when I had to decide what college I needed to go to, I would literally take pieces of paper and write, UCI or UC Davis, and then throw it in front of the gods and then ask the gods, help me decide which one should I go to. And then I would pick one up. And if it wasn't the one I wanted, I would say, oh, 2 out of 3, 2 out of 3. Let's do that again. I'm not sure if the gods were really listening the first time I said that. And so, you definitely want children to have critical thinking skills. And so that's, again, another reason why that communication piece is so important and to helping talk them through what they can do or the pros and cons of what college they're thinking about going to. So the messages that children receive early on in life can really set the stage for parent-child relationships moving forward. So Brownish Parenting is going to have podcast episodes that will explore South Asian parenting styles, how they impact child outcomes. We're also going to discuss which parenting styles lead bicultural children to having the best outcomes in life. Now, I have many positive memories of my mom always being home when we got back from school, doing lots of arts and crafts, coloring, going to the library to read books. We played carom as a family. We played badminton in our backyard. And so these are things that I really do try to replicate to this day because I truly cherish spending that quality time with my kids, doing these types of activities. And so when we look back on the ways in which we were parented in our family of origins, I want you to also think about, what were the things that you really enjoyed and that you're replicating with your families today? When we come back, we will talk more about the middle school and high school years and how I learned to live 2 very different lives and code switch between them. From my elementary school experiences, I learned that I needed to change if I wanted to feel more accepted at school and safe. Like I didn't want to have that uncomfortable feeling anymore. I knew I couldn't listen to my parents. I didn't want to be Amita anymore. I wanted to wear what I wanted to wear. I wanted to get the haircuts that I wanted to get. At one point, my mom had literally chopped off my hair and I looked like a boy in 2nd grade. And so I knew I needed to do things that were a lot more American, even though the messages I was getting at home was that when you're too American, that's almost like a bad thing. It's frowned upon. And, we would hear, oh, that's so American. Like, look at what these Americans are doing, right? So I had to transition myself into becoming the Amita I was supposed to be in K. And so I learned very quickly how to be that chameleon that was fitting in and pretending like what all my peers were doing. So I watched American TV shows. I learned more about what my white friends were doing. I didn't share too much about my own culture or what my family life looked like. And I didn't tell my parents very much about my school life, and sometimes took makeup to school or clothes that maybe they wouldn't approve of so I could change in the bathroom. Now, at home, I was a completely different person. My parents were finding different ways to pass on our culture to us as well as our religion. So we started to become a lot more involved with the Satya Sai Baba Center, as well as the Bengali community in the Bay Area. So we became a house that would actually host Sai Baba bhajans on every second Sunday of the month. And my parents had this life-size picture of Sai Baba in our family room. And we would also perform community service, like making sandwiches for the homeless. We would go to convalescent homes to sing songs and spend time with senior citizens. We would go off to these retreats all around the Bay Area. And so I spent most of my weekends either with religious activities like that or social gatherings with the Bengali community. I also spent countless hours preparing for dance performances or Rabindranath Tagore songs and performing at local Probashi events. And so in this way, I would say I had very different lives, right? I had two different lives, and I learned how to seamlessly code switch between them based on where I was and who I was with. And so I learned that to be accepted, I needed to change based on the situation I was in. And so I became an expert really at fitting in to different social situations. But that led me to not really knowing who I was or what I wanted because I preferred feeling safe to feeling unsafe. And for me, being myself and being that Amita was unsafe. As I got into my high school years, I realized I couldn't keep up the facade because my friends were able to go out and do things that I just couldn't do. It was a lot easier when I was younger, but it got a lot harder as we got older, right? And so it was exhausting keeping up with the lives. Like, why couldn't I go to this dance? Or why couldn't I have people over at my house? And I didn't have anything to say when all my friends were talking about these fun camping trips that they would go on the weekends together because they were in Girl Scouts or they were part of a Mormon community. And so I realized that I needed friends that were more like me, Indian and American. And maybe they were going through the same things I was going through. So I reached out to a few that I knew and asked if they wanted to start a Bollywood dance group together. And I love dancing. So I felt like this was a perfect way for our parents to let us all hang out together, doing something that we liked, but it was also productive. We were definitely learning about our culture. And so this was the first time we kind of used a strategy to help us hang out. And the strategy was to use our South Asian culture to do something that we wanted, which was to dance and be together and hang out. It wasn't until I met this group of girls that I truly felt like I belonged. You know, they were doing exactly the same things I was doing, right? They were living in between the hyphens. I didn't have to code switch with them. And it was a mind-shattering experience to find other girls who were able to navigate these strict households where they weren't able to tell their parents very much about their lives. And they were also code switching and doing things that they wanted to do at school. They were dating, they were finding ways to go to dances, and they were also trying to live up to their parents' expectations of them. So after meeting them, we became a lot more strategic with ways to get ourselves to the parties we wanted to go to without our parents knowing. We did a lot of questionable things that happened attending various parties across the Bay Area. We watched fights break out. We had to go to hospitals due to injuries. We met people online that we didn't really know. AOL was, really big during this period of time. And you get the idea. It was every parent's nightmare. So looking back, what I can't believe is that we were guiding ourselves with really limited knowledge about what was safe and unsafe. We were at a period of our lives where adolescence is all about risk taking and feeling like bad things are not going to happen to you. So that's important to note, right? And on a more positive note, we also develop these strong emotional bonds and ties with one another that we have maintained to this day. When a crisis hits, an SOS text goes out, and these girls are the first ones that are going to jump in, and they know exactly what to do because we have just had so many unexpected and anxiety-provoking life moments together. So I don't even really have to explain to them what I'm thinking or how I'm feeling because they know. And so we have really found solace in being together and figuring things out. Today, I have this sense of belonging because I was able to find these friends who were experiencing the world just like me. And from these experiences growing up at home and being exposed to my culture and religion, I have taken the parts that have resonated with me. The importance of doing seva and volunteering and giving back to the community. Today, I volunteer with Akila Health, which is a nonprofit that serves marginalized and vulnerable women across the nation, and I facilitate emotional intelligence workshops and train staff on topics like stress management. and emotional regulation. I also write books about the Indian culture like Holi, Diwali, and Rakhi to make it really easy to explain our cultural festivals to others and to make it easy and fun to celebrate in our homes and with our families, because I want to continue that tradition. The research also shows us that when bicultural children can connect to both their cultural identities, being Indian and American, they're going to have higher levels of self-esteem and confidence and do well academically. So Brownish Parenting is going to have episodes that will help parents understand how to navigate these cultural worlds so that they can positively identify with both or multiple cultures that are part of their identities. Next, we're going to address the college years, moving away from home, gaining more independence, to figure out who I really am, which is a central conflict that all young adults face when they leave home. The college years allowed for me to figure out what I actually believed. Did I believe in the values and beliefs I was taught by my parents? Did I believe that I shouldn't date? Or was it because I was told it was wrong because of my religious upbringing? Did I want to try alcohol? Did I know about the pros and cons? Well, not really, because I hadn't had these conversations with anyone that could really guide me through it. So when I started to date, I was actually in a somewhat unhealthy relationship. I hadn't had conversations about what toxic relationships look like. And so I did deal with manipulation of situations, jealousy, that need for control. But again, when you're in a relationship, you're usually hyper focused on the positive stuff and you don't really think about the negative. So it's important to have conversations about relationships with your kids before they actually get into a relationship. And so we are going to have an episode on this. When I entered college, I saw many of my friends navigating tricky situations with alcohol. They didn't know how much was too much. And this unfortunately led to some tragic situations and events in their lives. These were all situations that we couldn't tell our parents about. And so we had to navigate them the best that we could with the information that we had from other peers who had gone through similar situations. So this is why it's so important to cultivate those open lines of communication and healthy relationships with our kids from early stages, because as parents, we want to be there to support them. And when they go off to college, they will know that they can come back and ask us anything, and we're not going to freak out. So Brownish Parenting will look at types of topics you should address with your children before they head off to college so that they can make responsible decisions for themselves. Break, we will also talk about marriage and parenting. So my husband and I were together for 8 years before having children. So we had a long honeymoon period and we definitely made the most of it. We went out a lot when we lived in LA, as well as when we lived in New York. And we both just loved spending time with family and friends. Once we had our son, we had no idea how much work it was going to be. And that was definitely a point of contention between us because we had a lot more household chores to do. We had a lot more childcare duties that needed to get done. We needed someone to watch over our son 24/7. And I was getting my doctorate at Teachers College at the time. I was also working as a resident assistant or an RA of the building. My husband was working his full-time job at IBM. So we're definitely going to have an episode on gender socialization and how South Asians are navigating parenting roles and responsibilities. Stay tuned for that. Becoming a parent was definitely tough, like I stated, and there were many ways that where my own family of origin experiences kind of resurfaced for me as triggers. So the way in which I was parented came up. It's due, especially because I had fixed notions of what respect and disrespect meant from how I was raised. And there were a lot of things that I couldn't do because it was seen as disrespectful in my household growing up. And so when my son would do these things that all kids do, I reacted, right? Because I was triggered. And so one time he accidentally threw a sock at me and I erupted thinking he did it on purpose. And he still remembers that incident to this day. And so my passion again is helping parents from the inside out. They need to think about the way they were parented and bring that up and out so that they can really do things maybe differently. I also learned that I had to prioritize emotional intelligence for myself, regulate my own triggers and emotions when they were coming up. So today my son is definitely acknowledges that I'm a different parent. So he will say, yes, my mom has definitely chilled out. And he always makes it a point to say that my daughter has it much easier than him. And I'm just glad that he was able to see me transform in this way because I had to work really hard on that. And he sees me as a work in progress. And I love that, right? That he's continuously seeing me change and grow and not be that same parent throughout his life with me. So with that, after having children, we're now trying to figure out how to help my son and my daughter understand who they are in their environment as Indian Americans, with parents who are primarily raised here. So what are the values that we believe in and why, right? Why do we want them to have meaningful relationships in their lives? Why do we want them to be actively involved in their schools and in their communities? Why is it important for us to celebrate Indian cultural celebrations like Diwali? What about Durga Puja for Bengalis? What about Navratri and Garba for Gujaratis? Like, what do we want to spend our time doing and why? They really need to understand why we're doing it. Let's do that. So my children are going to school in a neighborhood with primarily first-generation South Asian Americans. So I'm seeing a lot of the issues that I face resurface today with the kids that I meet and whose parents didn't go to school here. And so while the parents may have maybe a little bit more time to think about and talk about their problems, their parents also are now seeing them as being very entitled or experiencing these first world problems because they grew up in a country that was third world and they were trying to have their basic needs met. So they're like, what are these problems our kids are having? And are we raising these kids to be kind of like brown fragility? Like they're super weak. They can't handle like these little problems that they're having with their friends at school. So they want them to toughen up. And they're like, the best way to do that is just to kind of be dismissive, not acknowledge that the problems exist, and minimize those experiences. But many children, again, are struggling to focus on school, which is what their parents are telling them to do, because they're suffering in various ways about the issues that they're having at school with their friends. So that's the reality of it. So Brownish Parenting is going to have an episode on toxic achievement, this hyper focus on grades and excelling in school, as well as noticing some of these red flags that children are having, like struggling with mental health concerns, depression, anxiety. What should parents really be looking for? As a parent who's often seen as an Oreo in my community because I am brown on the outside but white on the inside, I am trying to incorporate both elements of my Indian American identity with my children. I'm trying to teach them what it means to live between those hyphens, right? Instead of picking one or the other, how can we incorporate these practices using that authoritative parenting style, which is the style that prioritizes communication, active listening, and setting guidelines and limits for our children. So this is going to help our children have that higher internal locus of control, where they feel like they have control over what's happening in their lives. They have to think critically about the decisions that they're making. One way we do this is by having dinner together whenever we can and having conversations that help instill these bicultural values that we want to raise our children with. So we're trying to model how to communicate in healthy ways and really help both our son and our daughter feel respected, valued, and heard. So our dinners typically include 4 questions. The first one has to do with what went well that day. And this is going to help them with self-efficacy and self-esteem. They're going to say, hey, yeah, you know what? I did this thing and it went well. And I did it, right, on my own. And the second thing is, what was one expected thing that happened? And this is to normalize that every day at least one unexpected thing is going to happen, if not many. And it helps with emotional regulation, like regulating your emotion, because you've already expected that unexpected thing to happen. And it connects us back to our cultural values of emotional maturity. And it's how we react to these situations that are outside of our control. The third one is what mistakes did they make? And this helps us develop a growth mindset in our children because we see mistakes in our family as must takes, like you must take them in order to grow and get out of your comfort zone. And we want them to know that we also make mistakes. So when they hear their parents making mistakes, they don't feel as bad, right? Like, oh, I made all these mistakes. And they see that this is a part of being human. The fourth question is, what are they grateful for? Because we know that the key to living a fulfilled life is to be grateful. And this, again, is in line with our cultural values. So we did this a lot more when the kids were younger. Today, I will say it is tricky to navigate the situation in terms of schedules and practices and when they're home. But whenever they are and we are all together, we do try to get these questions in. Social media is another hot topic in our household. We want to be clear about expectations of them and why the rules exist and what happens if they don't follow the rules, right? So the consequences of what happens should be revealed ahead of time. They should know that if they exceed the limits that we've put, that they are going to not have their phone. They're going to have it taken away. They're going to get less screen time next time. So there's no confusion about what happens if they break the rule. There's no confusion over what happens when they break the rule and if they go over that allotted amount of time. We also have something called Tech Talk Tuesdays. This incorporates them talking about their online world into our physical world when we're having dinner. So if it's a Tuesday, we will, or once a week, even if it's not a Tuesday, we ask them, right? Like, what types of things are going on online? We want to know what algorithms they're being exposed to on social media. What games are they playing? Have they noticed anything disturbing, like cyberbullying? So we can kind of talk to them about some of those best practices. We also want to mention a digital footprint. And so really thinking about what you put out there. In addition, we also debate topics, right? So we talk to them about how social media is very habit forming. And they may say, oh, like it's not a habit for me. And then we talk to them about how, you're scrolling on your screens. Like, when do you actually stop? Like, do you actually know when to stop, or does it just keep going? Like, and then are you addicted to like those notifications, right? And so that gets them thinking about it. Like, they may say like, no, they're not addicted, but then they realize that all this time went by and they were not in control over when they should stop being on social media. It's an ongoing conversation, but the more we talk about the ways in which these companies are trying to attract us and keep us on, the better they're going to get at digital literacy for themselves and setting those boundaries and understanding the ways it's impacting their brains. So it's never going to be easy to set and enforce rules. But another thing that helps us navigate these typically tricky and heated discussion points is our monthly family meetings. So when things are getting heated and you notice that, you feel the physiological response that your body is giving off. Your heartbeat is rapidly beating, you're breathing more heavily. So I just say, hey, can we table that for our family meeting? Like, can we just talk about this when we're not like in this hijack, this amygdala hijack, right? That we're having. And so the family meetings are key because we have an agenda. We're usually calm. We're in a better mood. We've slept the night before. It's usually on the weekends. So it's a little bit more intentional. We don't just talk through the tough stuff, but we also talk about the good stuff. We talk about all the things that are going really well. We talk about trips that are coming up. We want to end with a family bonding activity that day, whether that's just getting some yogurt or playing a game, going to a movie. So brownish parenting is going to end with some tips based on the research for parents who want to cultivate these intentional family routines and rituals so they can have deeper and more meaningful relationships with their children. Stay tuned. After the break, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk to you about our first episode and the guest that we're going to be bringing on. Welcome back. Today, I wanted to give you a quick snapshot of my life experiences and how all of these experiences have really brought me to be passionate about the topics that we will be discussing on the Brownish Parenting podcast. So, in this way, our generation is going to be learning from past generations and incorporating new ways of parenting based on the research that I bring to you, right? And based on the research of how our children are experiencing their bicultural world. I look forward to bringing on experts that will help us gain more insight into these topics so we can decide how we want to approach these topics for our own families. Each family, like I stated, will be addressing these topics in a different way based on their unique values, beliefs, and worldviews and perspectives. I am so grateful to @Ruckus Avenue Radio, who is providing us with this. I am so grateful to Ruckus Avenue Radio, who is providing us with this platform to have South Asian American content. And they've partnered with the iHeartRadio app to provide this content to a global audience. So I hope that as we listen to this podcast, we collectively think of other issues, topics, and challenges that our kids are experiencing in their lives that we would like more support and guidance on. I want you to bring them to me. DM me at Dr. Amita Roy Shah or at Brownish Parenting on Instagram. I'm excited for us to dive into these topics and to question, to challenge, to debate what this looks like in our day-to-day lives. I hope that these topics spark more conversations for you and your families. I hope that they help you shape what you want to continue for future generations when you think about what you want to prioritize. And I want to thank you today for listening. I am super grateful that you are a part of this Brownish parenting journey with me. Stay tuned for our very first episode, which will be with sexologist and sex therapist Moshami Ghosh. And we will be talking to her about how to talk to our kids about sex education topics. And it's going to be from early childhood all the way up to adolescence. So please DM me at Dr. Amita Roy Shah if you have questions related to sex education topics for your children, because we will definitely be able to have her address those questions for us next week on Sundays at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you haven't done so already, make sure you download the free iHeartRadio app and follow at Ruckus Radio Avenue